Title: Everyone rejected the blind and disabled alien princess, except this human. In a galaxy teeming with advanced civilizations, the Zanari were a species like no other, tall, regal, and powerful. Their empire spanned across dozens of star systems, their fleets unmatched, and their warriors feared throughout the galaxy. The Zanari were considered the pinnacle of evolution, but beneath their towering exterior was a quiet truth that even their own people struggled to accept: not all Zanari were perfect. Princess Varela was the embodiment of that imperfection. Born blind, with legs that could not bear the weight of her status as heir to the throne, she had been sheltered away in the royal palace, far from the eyes of the people. Her condition was a source of shame for her people. She could not see, she could not walk unaided, and her presence was often deemed a symbol of weakness that threatened the empire's image of superiority. Her rejection by her own people started early. The council, who advised the throne, saw her as a liability, an obstacle to the Zanari's pride and future. Whispers filled the palace halls, rumors about the princess' inability to lead, to command, to rise to the expectations of her lineage. One by one, her potential suitors, rulers, warriors, and diplomats from across the stars rejected her, unable to bear the thought of an imperfect match. For the Zanari, strength, both physical and mental, was everything. And yet, there was one who did not reject her. Captain Elias Vance, a human from Earth, was sent as part of a diplomatic mission to the Zanari Empire. Humans, considered a lesser species by most galactic civilizations, were generally ignored or treated with disdain by the galaxy's elites. But the Earth delegation had its purposes, and Elias was tasked with negotiating a trade agreement. His species' small stature and lack of advanced weaponry were often dismissed by the Zanari, but Elias was known for his sharp mind and keen diplomatic skills. When he was invited to meet the princess, he was wary. He had heard the rumors, seen the way the Zanari spoke of her, whispers of the blind and crippled princess, a mockery of their species' superiority. Yet, when he stood before her, something in his heart shifted. Princess Varela sat in her chair, a device attached to her eyes to assist with her blindness, her legs supported by a mechanical brace. Her features, delicate and regal, betrayed none of the pain she carried in her heart. Despite her physical limitations, her mind was sharp, and her voice held the authority of someone far beyond her years. "I know why you're here," she said softly, sensing his approach with an uncanny precision. "You think I'm a disappointment to my people." Elias was taken aback by her directness. He hadn't expected her to acknowledge the truth so easily. "Your people," he began cautiously, "they don't see you as the leader they want, but I don't think they understand you." Princess Varela's smile was faint but knowing. "No, they do not." For the first time in years, someone had spoken to her as a person, not as a symbol of failure. Elias saw her, truly saw her, not as a disabled alien princess, but as someone who had been weighed down by the expectations of an empire too proud to see beyond its own arrogance. Over the next few weeks, their discussions deepened. Elias learned of the immense pressure Varela faced, the cruelty of being rejected by those she was supposed to rule, and the way she had taught herself to adapt in a world that saw her as broken. Varela shared her dreams of a galaxy united by peace, one where power wasn't defined by physical prowess but by wisdom and empathy. "What would you do, Captain Vance, if you were in my place?" she asked one day, her voice barely a whisper. Elias thought for a long moment. I'd fight to show them that a leader doesn't need to be perfect. They need to be strong in different ways, strong in heart, in mind, in spirit." She nodded, the faintest spark of hope igniting in her eyes. "Then maybe I can still lead." In the days that followed, Elias helped Varela craft a plan, a bold vision of diplomacy and unity. He knew the political climate of the Zanari Empire better than most, and together they began to create a strategy to challenge the Empire's traditional views on leadership. It wouldn't be easy. There were those who would fight them at every turn, who would see any change as a threat to their power. But Elias refused to back down. He was there for one reason, to help the princess. He believed in her, not in spite of her disabilities, but because of them. Her pain, her struggles, made her stronger in ways the Zanari didn't understand. They had rejected her, but he would not. And when the time came for Varela to stand before the ruling council, Elias stood beside her. The debate was fierce, with the counselors shouting and challenging her right to even speak. But she remained calm, unwavering, her voice clear as she explained the vision she had for the future. A future where strength was measured by compassion, where a ruler's ability to unite was more important than their ability to command armies. The council rejected her, just as they had rejected everyone before her. But this time, something was different. Elias Vance, the human who had stood by her side, refused to back down. With him by her side, Varella's voice would not be silenced. The galaxy watched as a human, once considered insignificant, stood up for the princess who had been cast aside. It was the beginning of a new era, an era where strength was not just about physical power, but about the power of the mind and heart. The Zenari Empire would change, whether they liked it or not, and in time, they would come to realize that the greatest leader they could ever have wasn't the one who could conquer worlds, but the one who could conquer their own prejudices. As for Elias and Varela, they stood together, two individuals from vastly different worlds, bound by a shared belief in a future where everyone had the right to be seen, heard, and respected, no matter their differences. Title: Everyone rejected the blind and disabled alien princess, except this human, continued. The days that followed Varella's speech were filled with uncertainty and opposition. While the council's rejection was expected, it stung. The whispers of disapproval echoed through the halls of the palace. The Zenari elite, those who had long dominated the empire with their unyielding strength, believed that the princess's failure to lead would tarnish their reputation forever. To them, Varella's rise was an affront to their pride, a challenge to the very ideals that made the Zenari great. But Elias wasn't about to let her fight alone. While the political landscape seemed impossible to shift, he knew that change often began in the smallest moments, in the hearts of individuals. He spent countless hours helping Varela, teaching her the art of diplomacy, not just in negotiation, but in persuasion. He taught her how to read people, how to see beyond the surface, to uncover the fears and hopes of her adversaries. "It's not about forcing them to accept you," Elias said one evening as they sat in her chambers, the stars visible through the wide windows. "It's about showing them a new way to see leadership. You're not the weak princess they think you are. You're the change they need, even if they don't realize it yet." Varela smiled softly, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just his words that gave her hope. It was the unshakable faith he had in her. Elias had never once viewed her as broken, never once pitted her. He saw her as an equal, as someone capable of leading, of doing things no one else could. But that was still just one side of the equation. There were many who stood firmly in opposition to her, those who believed that the Zenari needed a strong, physically capable ruler to maintain their empire's power. A blind, disabled princess was simply a symbol of weakness, and that would not be tolerated. Then, everything changed. A crisis emerged, an external threat that the Zenari had not anticipated. The Caldari, a fierce and expansionist alien race from a neighboring star system, had launched an aggressive invasion into Zenari territory. Their fleets moved swiftly, their tactics brutal, and the Zenari military, while powerful, was struggling to adapt to the Caldari's unconventional warfare strategies. The Zenari War Council called for immediate action. In times of crisis, they needed a strong leader to unify the empire, to lead their forces against the invaders. But the current emperor, Varela's father, was aging, and his health had deteriorated rapidly. The council now looked to Varela, the supposed heir, to step forward. Varela knew the moment had arrived. Despite the years of rejection and the snide comments, she understood that this was her chance to prove not just to her people, but to herself, that she could lead. Her disability didn't define her. Her mind, her strategic acumen, and her vision for the future did. Elias, ever by her side, saw the determination in her eyes and knew she had what it took. "You've got this," he told her simply, squeezing her hand for support. "The galaxy will see you for who you truly are." The War Council convened again, this time with Varela stepping forward not as a princess, but as a leader. The room was filled with the usual figures of power, military generals, aristocrats, and high-ranking officials. Most looked at her with doubt, some with barely concealed disdain. But Varela did not flinch. "I may not be what you expected," she began, her voice steady, "but I am exactly what this empire needs. You believe that strength lies in physical might, But the strength that will save us is in our ability to adapt, to think beyond the battlefield, to unite our forces, and to lead with wisdom. I will not fight this war with brute force. I will fight it with strategy, with understanding, and with a vision for a new future. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, the council fell silent. Some exchanged wary glances, while others seemed to consider her words for the first time. The Caldari threat had forced their hand. This wasn't a time for pride, but for survival. After a tense pause, one of the generals, a veteran of countless battles, stood. If you can prove that your methods will work, Princess, he said, his tone begrudging but respectful, we will follow you. Varela nodded, already thinking several moves ahead. I will prove it, and I will begin by uniting our people, not through fear, but through purpose. The plan she presented was a daring one, to use the Empire's vast network of alliances to stage a counteroffensive that would strike not at the Caldari's military strength, but at their logistics, cutting off their supply lines and isolating their forces. It was a strategy that required diplomacy as much as military might, one that no one had expected from a princess who had been so easily dismissed. As the council deliberated, Elias stepped forward. I've seen what she's capable of, he said, his voice clear and unwavering. She doesn't need to prove herself to anyone. She has the heart and mind of a true leader. The room was still, as if the presence of a human, a species the Zenari had long dismissed as insignificant, had changed the dynamic entirely. Some looked at him with suspicion, while others seemed to consider his words. But it was Varela who commanded the final word. The decision is yours, she said, her gaze unwavering. But I ask you to see the Empire's future. We can't afford to cling to outdated beliefs. Strength doesn't come from physical perfection, it comes from the ability to lead, to adapt, and to care for those who follow you. It was a bold challenge, but in that moment, it was clear, the Zenari were faced with a choice. They could reject Varela again, or they could embrace the future she represented, one where strength was defined by compassion, intelligence, and courage, not just physical might. And when the vote came, against all odds, the majority sided with her. The Zenari Empire, once determined to cast aside its blind and disabled princess, had chosen to follow her. With Elias by her side, Varela led her people into the greatest victory they had ever known, not with force, but with strategy and unity. The Caldari were driven back, and peace was restored. But more than that, the galaxy began to see the Zenari in a new light. The strength of their empire no longer lay solely in their ability to conquer, but in their willingness to evolve. In the end, it was the blind and disabled alien princess who showed the universe what true leadership meant, and the human who had believed in her from the start. Title: Everyone rejected the blind and disabled alien princess, except this human, continued. The victory over the Caldari was a turning point. The Zenari Empire, once a symbol of unmatched military dominance, had been saved not by sheer power but by a leader who refused to conform to the old ideals. Princess Varela, once dismissed as weak and incapable, was now heralded as a hero. But the triumph wasn't just hers. It belonged to the alliance she had built, to the people who had dared to stand with her against the tide of prejudice. For Varela, the victory was bittersweet. While the Caldari were driven back, the scars of the war were evident on the Empire. There were those who had come to respect her, to see her leadership for what it was, but there were still many who held on to the old beliefs, those who saw strength only in the ability to dominate, to destroy. I've done what was needed, she said to Elias one evening, the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressing down on her. But the real challenge begins now. The Empire is fractured, divided between those who want change and those who refuse to see it. Elias, ever her steadfast supporter, looked at her with understanding. You can't change everything overnight, but you've started something. Varela, the people, your people, they won't forget what you've done. The tension between the old guard and the new began to manifest in political maneuvering. The War Council, once divided, now found itself at a crossroads. Some, like General Thorin, who had once spoken out against her, became her most ardent supporters, recognizing that her approach was the only way to ensure the Empire's survival in an increasingly unpredictable galaxy. But others, like High Chancellor Karine, who had long stood by the belief that only the strongest should rule, remained staunchly opposed to her vision. The real test came when the Zenari Empire's neighboring factions began to make their own moves. Some saw the Caldari defeat as a sign of weakness, an opportunity to expand their own territories. Others, fearing the rise of a leader like Varela, began to destabilize diplomatic ties, refusing to recognize her as a legitimate heir to the throne. The galaxy had never seen an empire as divided as the Zenari's was now, and it was clear that a new war was brewing, one of ideology. Varela's next challenge wasn't just to secure her position, it was to unite her people, to prove that her strength lay not just in military victories but in the power of unity and compassion. And it would require more than strategy, it would require her to make sacrifices, to ask difficult questions, and to confront her own doubts about her leadership. "You've led us through the storm," General Thorin said one day, standing with her on the palace balcony, looking out at the vast stars. But the calm that follows a storm is often the hardest part. Varela's mind was heavy with the knowledge that the coming months would be critical. She had the loyalty of her closest advisors and the people who had supported her during the war. But it wasn't enough. She needed to bring the entire empire together, to prove that change could come without bloodshed, without violence. "I know what's at stake," Varela replied quietly. "The hardest part is making them understand that we are stronger when we're united, that we don't need to be perfect, we need to be compassionate, to look at the strengths in one another, not just the weaknesses." In a bold move, Varela called for a series of diplomatic meetings with the other galactic factions, including those who had once been her enemies, and those who still doubted her. She extended an olive branch to those who had feared her rise, making it clear that the future she envisioned wasn't one of domination, but of collaboration, a new era where strength came not from military might, but from shared purpose. Among the attendees was the enigmatic leader of the Yverian coalition, one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. They had long viewed the Zenari as arrogant, their belief in physical superiority a point of contention in many diplomatic circles. But Varela, with Elias by her side, faced them not as a broken princess, but as an equal. The Yverian leader, an imposing figure named Tershon, had always seen strength in power, in the ability to subjugate. He had heard the rumors of the blind and disabled Zenari princess, and had expected her to be a mere puppet of the council. "You've surprised us all, princess," Tershon said when they finally met face to face. "Not because you defeated the Caldari, but because you've brought your people to the table in ways none of us expected." Varela held his gaze, her voice calm but resolute. "The empire must evolve, Tershon. We cannot rely on brute strength alone. If we are to thrive, we must learn to work together." The Caldari were a wake-up call, not just to my people, but to all of us. The negotiations that followed were intense, with fierce debates over trade routes, defense pacts, and cultural exchanges. But Varela didn't back down. She used her wisdom and the knowledge she had gained from her conversations with Elias to build a network of alliances that transcended old rivalries. The turning point came when she proposed a galaxy-wide summit, an unprecedented gathering of leaders from all factions, where the focus wouldn't be on territorial expansion or military dominance, but on shared values. She wanted to show that even the most powerful empires could find common ground. That strength was not just about taking from others, but about lifting them up. By the end of the summit, many were still skeptical, but some had begun to see the potential in Varela's vision. When the final agreements were signed, it wasn't just a victory for the Zenari Empire, it was a victory for the idea that leadership could be built on compassion, unity, and the belief that every voice mattered. Back in the Zenari capital, as Varela looked out over her people, she realized that her journey was far from over. She had taken the first step toward rebuilding an empire that could change the galaxy. But the road ahead would not be easy. There were still many who saw her disabilities as flaws, many who feared what she represented. Yet, as long as she had Elias by her side, she knew that they could face whatever came next. "You've changed everything, Varela," Elias said quietly, standing beside her once more. "The galaxy is different now. You're different." Varela smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "We are different, Elias. We're not defined by what others think of us. We're defined by what we do together." And with that, the blind and disabled alien princess, who had once been cast aside, stood tall, ready to lead her people into a future of unity and understanding. proving that even the most unlikely of leaders could change the universe. Title: Everyone rejected the blind and disabled alien princess, except this human, continued. The months that followed the summit were pivotal for both Princess Varela and the Zanari Empire. The fragile alliances she had forged with other galactic factions were tested by both internal and external pressures. There were still those who viewed her rise with suspicion, as well as factions that sought to exploit her leadership for their own gain. But she had already proven herself capable, and with each victory, she further solidified her place as the rightful leader of the Zanari Empire. Despite her growing influence, the road to full acceptance was not easy. While some factions now saw her as a visionary, others still doubted her abilities. Many Zanari aristocrats continued to see her blindness and disability as flaws rather than attributes of strength, and there were whispers that perhaps she would never truly command their loyalty. But Varela, ever resilient, continued to push forward, her mind sharp as ever, her resolve unshaken. Elias, who had stayed by her side since the war, was her rock. Though he had come to the Zanari Empire as a low-ranking diplomat, his status had since grown, partly due to his relationship with Varela, but more because of his unrelenting belief in her vision. Humans, once seen as insignificant in the grand galactic scale, were now being recognized as potential allies, with Earth's technological prowess becoming more valuable by the day. Still, Elias never let his new position sway him. His loyalty to Varela was unwavering, and he continued to guide her through the intricacies of diplomacy with a steady hand. One day, as Varela sat in her royal chamber, reviewing data on an upcoming trade agreement with the Drelthian Republic, Elias entered with a concerned look on his face. "There's a matter I think you should know about," he began, his voice serious. Varela glanced up, her unseeing eyes turning toward his voice. "What's happened?" Elias hesitated for a moment, then spoke more carefully. "A new threat has emerged, this time from within the Empire. Some of the high-ranking members of the military are planning a coup." Varela's pulse quickened. A coup? The notion of betrayal within her own ranks was one she had never fully anticipated, though she had always known that her reforms would not be universally welcomed. "Who?" she asked sharply. "General Thorin's faction," Elias replied. "It seems they believe you've overstepped your authority, and they're rallying the most traditionalist military commanders who feel your leadership is undermining the Empire's strength." Varela leaned back in her chair, processing the information with remarkable calm. She had always known that change would breed resistance, but this was different. Thorin, once one of her fiercest critics, had come to see the wisdom of her approach during the Caldari War. Now, it seemed, he had returned to his old ways, and with him came a small but influential part of the military. "We need to act quickly," Varela said, a cold resolve settling over her. "If the military turns against us, the Empire could fall into chaos, but we can't use the same methods of force they would. We need to convince them, not through weapons, but through reason." Elias nodded, knowing the path ahead would not be easy. "You've already done the impossible, Varela. I know you can do this too." With that, Varela called for an emergency meeting with her closest advisors, including General Thorin, though she knew it would be difficult to sway him. Thorin had long believed that the strength of the Empire lay in its military might. His loyalty to the idea of a traditional Zanari Empire was as unshakable as her belief in reform. When Thorin entered the chamber, his presence was imposing. He was a towering figure, his sharp eyes betraying no hint of emotion. His reputation as a warrior was legendary. He had led many successful campaigns during his youth, and his commitment to the Zanari military ideal had earned him the respect of his peers. Yet there was something different about him now, something that hinted at uncertainty. "I didn't think it would come to this," Thorin said, his voice heavy with unspoken words. "But you've led us astray, Princess. Your ideas are dividing us, and the Empire needs unity more than anything else right now." Varela stood, steadying herself with the help of her brace, her back straight as she faced him. "General Thorin, I have not led you astray. I've led you into the future. A future where our strength comes not from conquering others, but from our ability to adapt and collaborate. We cannot continue to rule through fear and force." Thorin's eyes narrowed. "And what would you have us do? Sit idly by as our enemies grow stronger? The Caldari were only a taste of what's coming." "I am not suggesting weakness, General," Varela replied, her voice calm but firm. I am suggesting strength of a different kind. We must change our approach, adapt to the realities of a shifting galaxy. Our power does not lie in overwhelming force. It lies in our ability to unite, to influence through diplomacy, and to lead with wisdom, not just brute strength. Thorin stared at her, his brow furrowed as if weighing her words. And what if you're wrong? What if your unified empire is just a dream? Can we really afford to gamble with the future of the Zanari like this? The silence in the room was thick, and for a long moment, no one spoke. It was clear that Varella's vision was at odds with Thorin's. The divide between the two had always existed, but now it had reached its breaking point. Elias, who had been standing quietly at her side, stepped forward. General, what's at stake here isn't just about military strength, it's about our survival. The galaxy has changed, and we can either adapt with it, or we can be left behind. The choice is yours. The words hung in the air, and Varela could see the conflict in Thorin's eyes. He was a man of principle, and he had spent his life defending the Empire as it had been. But Varela was offering something entirely different, a chance to redefine what strength meant. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Thorin spoke. I see what you are trying to do, Princess, but I don't know if I can follow you. Varella's heart sank, but she did not let her disappointment show. Then you have made your choice, General. I cannot force you to see what I see, nor can I make you believe in my vision, but I will not give up on it, and I will not give up on the Empire. Thorin nodded grimly. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps I am too entrenched in the old ways. But make no mistake, Princess, there are many who feel as I do, and the Empire may not be ready for the change you propose. With that, he turned and left, the weight of his decision hanging in the air. Varela, feeling the weight of the moment, turned to Elias. This is just the beginning, isn't it? Elias nodded, his expression serious. It's not going to be easy, but you've already shown the galaxy what you're capable of, and I believe that in the end, the Zanari will see the truth. You are the leader they need. Varela smiled faintly, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the challenges ahead, but she had come this far, and she wasn't about to turn back now. The Empire had rejected her before, and yet she had proven them wrong, and she would do it again, if only to show them that true strength didn't lie in the perfection they sought, but in the courage to change, to evolve, and to lead with a heart full of compassion. And with Elias at her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The future of the Zanari Empire, of the galaxy, was uncertain. But one thing was clear, Princess Varella's reign had only just begun. Title: Everyone rejected the blind and disabled alien princess, except this human, continued. The aftermath of General Thorin's departure sent ripples through the Zanari military, and while Varela had expected resistance from the more conservative factions, the tension in the Empire was palpable. Whispers of mutiny spread through the ranks of the armed forces, and the political elite, while outwardly supportive, could not hide their lingering doubts. It became clear that the conflict between Varela's vision and the old ways of the Empire was not going to be settled with words alone. Thorin's departure had sparked a firestorm, but it also ignited a quiet hope among those who had supported her all along. They believed that a new Zanari Empire, one that led with wisdom, compassion, and unity, was possible, if she could win this war of ideals. Varela's first step was to reinforce her position within the military. The internal strife had weakened her standing, but she still had powerful allies within the military. General Thorin's faction was a large one, but not all of the military was aligned with him. She needed to rally her loyal commanders and shift the tides in her favor. She called for a council with the remaining military leadership, those who had fought beside her during the Caldari War, those who had seen firsthand that her strategies could work. The meeting was held in the war room, a stark, sterile place filled with projections of star maps and military reports. Varela stood at the head of the room, her stance commanding as ever, her hands poised on the table as she faced the assembled commanders. Elias was at her side, ever her guiding force, but this was her moment to lead. I understand the divisions within our ranks, Varela began, her voice unwavering, but what happened with General Thorin isn't just a matter of one man's opinion. It's a reflection of our struggle as a people. Are we willing to cling to a broken system, one that values physical might over the potential of a unified empire? Or will we rise above this, and lead the galaxy with vision, compassion, and strength of character? One of the senior generals, A woman named Commander Nura spoke up, her tone serious. Your approach is unconventional, Princess, but it's been effective. The Kaldari invasion taught us all that brute force isn't always the answer. The Kaldari's greatest strength wasn't their military, it was their cunning. You understand that. That's why I'm with you. Her words were met with murmurs of agreement from others in the room. Varela could feel the tides shifting. Her message was starting to reach them, slowly, but surely. She wasn't just the blind and disabled princess anymore. She was their leader, and she had proven it in battle. But not all of us are convinced, another voice said. This one from a younger officer who had been loyal to Thorin. The people need strength, and if they don't see it from us, they'll find it elsewhere. Varela's gaze hardened as she met the officer's eyes. Strength isn't just about domination. It's about vision. It's about the ability to lead a people through uncertain times, to inspire them to be greater than they ever thought possible. The Kaldari were a threat because they forced us to rethink what we stand for. The galaxy is changing, and if we do not change with it, we will fall behind. The officer looked down, unable to meet her gaze. The truth in her words was undeniable, and the room fell silent as Varela's message sunk in. Elias, who had been quiet until now, spoke softly, but with the authority of someone who had seen the unfolding of history firsthand. You've already proven your strength. The victory over the Kaldari wasn't just military, it was ideological. It was the belief that unity, intelligence, and compassion could save the Zanari Empire, and that belief is still what drives us. The silence in the room stretched on. There was a weight to the moment, a sense that the future of the Empire was being decided right there. Varela stood tall, her unseeing eyes steady and resolute. I have one request, she said, breaking the silence. I ask that you stand with me, not just as my commanders, but as my equals. The time for traditional leadership is over. If we are to win the loyalty of our people, we must lead by example. We must show them that strength is not just about power, it is about integrity, intelligence, and the willingness to listen. Slowly, one by one, the commanders began to nod. The hesitation in their eyes was still there, but so too was the recognition of something greater. They had been trained to follow orders, to fight without question, but now, they were being asked to fight for something new, something that, while still uncertain, had the potential to reshape the future of their empire. We stand with you, Princess, Commander Nura said, her voice steady, not because of your lineage, but because of what you stand for. Let's show the galaxy that the Zanari are more than just conquerors, we are leaders. Varela nodded, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. Then let's prepare for the next phase. The Empire will not change overnight, but together, we will lead it into the future. We will build something stronger than any military might. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The loyalty of her commanders was the first step in securing the future of the Empire, and Varela knew that the real challenge was just beginning. As they left the room, Elias turned to her. You've made a powerful statement today, Varela. She smiled faintly. It's only the beginning. The real work starts now. The weeks that followed were filled with diplomatic efforts, military reorganizations, and public appearances designed to further solidify Varela's standing. She addressed her people not as a ruler, but as a fellow Zanari, someone who understood their fears and their hopes. And slowly, very slowly, the tides began to turn in her favor. But the empire was still divided. There were still those who clung to the old ways, still factions within the military and the aristocracy who saw her as a threat to their power. And so, Varela knew that the true test of her leadership was yet to come. One evening, as the stars flickered outside the palace, Varela stood on the balcony, her hand resting on the railing, a soft breeze moving through her hair. Elias joined her, his presence as steady as ever. I wonder if they'll ever fully accept me, Varela said quietly, the weight of the galaxy pressing on her shoulders. Elias turned to her, his gaze steady. It doesn't matter if they accept you, Varela. What matters is that you've already proven yourself. You've led the Zanari to victory, and you've shown them that leadership is not about strength, it's about heart. And that's something they'll never forget. She looked out into the vastness of space, the stars shining brightly in the distance. I won't stop. I can't. The Empire deserves more than what it was, and I will make sure they see that. Elias nodded, and I'll be with you every step of the way." Varela smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had once been rejected, cast aside because of her blindness and her disability. But now, she was a leader in her own right. The Zanari Empire had been given a second chance, one they would never forget. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Varela knew she had the strength, the wisdom, and the heart to lead them forward. Together, they would face the future, and together, they would prove that the Empire's true strength lay not in its weapons, but in its people. Title: Everyone rejected the blind and disabled alien princess, except this human, continued. The months after the military council meeting passed in a blur of strategy, diplomacy, and constant pressure. The divided empire had yet to fully accept Princess Varela's vision, but the seeds of change were planted deep. She continued to navigate the delicate balance between maintaining her authority and earning the trust of a people and military that had only recently considered her an outcast. Yet there was one thing she knew for certain: she was not alone. Elias had been her constant companion, her unwavering ally, and her most trusted confidant. His loyalty, as strong as her own resolve, had proven to be an indispensable asset. Despite the progress, the unrest within the empire had not subsided. There were whispers of rebellion in the underworld of Zanari cities, rumors of black market weapons flowing into rebel factions, and a continued undercurrent of dissatisfaction from the military, who were wary of Varela's unorthodox methods. The Caldari War had proved that unity was the greatest weapon they possessed. But now, the very forces that should be supporting her were threatening the Empire's fragile cohesion. One evening, as the stars glittered above the Zanari capital, Varela met with her closest advisors in the war room. Elias stood by her side, as always, his calm presence a steadying influence. The map of the Empire was projected before them, holographic markers indicating military positions, supply lines, and political hotspots. "We've received credible intel," General Karan, one of Varela's most trusted allies, said, his face grim. "The rebellion is growing stronger, and they're rallying under a leader known only as the Shadow. Whoever this person is, they have support within the military and are targeting key assets in the core systems." Varela's heart sank. A rebellion wasn't something she had prepared for, it was too soon. Yet she couldn't afford to ignore it. The Empire had already suffered so much from internal division. A civil war could tear it apart entirely. "I will not let this Empire fall to civil war," Varela said, her voice resolute. "We cannot afford to let the old guard dismantle what we've built. We must confront this shadow head-on, before they rally more support." Elias leaned in, his brow furrowed. "But if they have military backing, we need to be careful. We can't fight the entire military, especially if we don't know how deeply this rebellion runs." Varela nodded, knowing Elias was right. The rebellion could not be defeated by brute force alone, it had to be dismantled carefully, with precision. "We need to find out who the Shadow is. I want the best intelligence we have, and I want to know where their leaders are hiding." As the war room fell into planning, a sense of urgency took hold. Varela had always believed that diplomacy and unity were the keys to the Empire's survival, but now she was faced with the uncomfortable reality that sometimes diplomacy had to be backed by force. The Empire was on the brink of collapse, and the path forward was uncertain. Days later, Varela and Elias were aboard the flagship, the Madrigal, preparing for an operation that would take them deep into the heart of the rebellion's territory. While the military had their doubts about her, her ability to plan with precision and empathy had earned her a loyal following among the elite. She would rely on them now. "We'll make a decisive strike," Varela said, addressing the senior officers aboard the Madrigal. "But we will do so with integrity. We do not wish to destroy the hearts of the people, only to remove the forces that seek to divide us." The officers nodded, and preparations for the operation commenced. They knew what was at stake, the survival of the Empire. But they also understood the stakes for Varela personally. Her leadership was on the line, and the rebellion's leader, whoever they were, had the potential to destroy everything she had worked for. Hours later, as the Madrigal entered the shadowed expanse of the rebellion's territory, Varela stood at the bridge, her eyes gazing out into the darkness of space. Elias joined her, offering a quiet smile, one of reassurance. "You're ready for this," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This is the test you've been waiting for." Varela turned to him, her face set in determination. I hope you're right, because I have no choice but to succeed. The Madrigal dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of a rebel-controlled system. The fleet moved into position, silent and calculated, waiting for her orders. Commence the infiltration, Varela commanded. We'll strike quickly, but we need to keep their attention off the civilians. Make it surgical, and no unnecessary casualties. As the fleet advanced, the battle began. They infiltrated a strategic rebel stronghold, engaging the rebels in a fierce but precise operation. Varela's forces struck fast, catching the enemy by surprise. Her leadership and strategy ensured that no unnecessary blood was shed. This wasn't a war for conquest. It was a battle for peace. But as the operation pressed on, Varela's forces encountered a resistance unlike anything they had faced before. The rebels were not only military defectors, they were civilians. Former Zenari who had been left behind by a system they felt had abandoned them. And at the heart of this insurgency was the Shadow, a leader with a mysterious past, seemingly skilled in both military strategy and rhetoric. Varela, once again, found herself standing at a precipice, torn between her desire to end the rebellion and her compassion for those who had been driven to this point by their grievances. Who was this Shadow who had risen up against her? After weeks of intense operations, the Madrigal finally cornered the rebel forces on a desolate moon, a place where no one would have expected such a final showdown. Varela and her top commanders boarded a transport vessel, ready to face the rebellion's leader. The final confrontation took place in a vast underground cavern, where the last of the rebel forces had made their stand. Varela, flanked by Elias and General Caron, led the charge. They descended into the cavern, the echoes of their footsteps mingling with the sounds of distant skirmishes. At the heart of the cavern stood the Shadow, an enigmatic figure cloaked in darkness. Varela, undeterred by her blindness, stood firm, her senses heightened, attuned to the presence of every individual in the room. I know who you are, Varela said, her voice unwavering. The figure before her removed their hood, revealing a woman, sharp-eyed and regal, with an aura of undeniable authority. I am Ceres, the woman said, her voice cold, and I am the one who will tear down the empire you've built. Varela's heart raced. The name hit her like a blow. Ceres, the daughter of the last emperor, the one who had been exiled and forgotten. The rebellion was not merely a response to the empire's failures. It was a personal vendetta, a fight to reclaim what was once hers. You were exiled, Varela said, keeping her voice steady, and you're not the only one who has suffered under the empire. But violence is not the answer. Ceres, the empire needs change, not destruction. Ceres scoffed, her eyes flashing with bitterness. Change? You don't understand. You've taken everything from me. Princess, she paused, her words sharp, full of anger. You've taken everything from us. Varela stepped forward, her voice firm but compassionate. I haven't taken anything from you. I'm offering you something greater, a chance to rebuild, a chance to lead by wisdom, not by bloodshed. You don't have to destroy the empire to reclaim it.